The thread we'll be cutting in this series is a 1" 8 UNC, which is Unified National Course. It'll be a 1". It'll have a 1" outside diameter, and it'll be 8 threads per inch. So with this information in hand, there's two things that we need to calculate to grind our threading tool. One of them is the width of the thread on the point of the tool, and the other is the helix angle of the thread. So let's look at the width of the flat first. How do we calculate the width of a flat for our threading tool? Well, it's pretty easy. The flat is simply equal to the pitch of the thread divided by 8. Okay, what is the pitch of a thread? Let's take a look at our example here. The pitch of the thread is the distance from one thread to the next. And we arrive at that distance by taking 1 and dividing by the number of threads per inch, or the reciprocal of the number of threads per inch. So let's do that. The number of threads per inch in this case is 8. So we'll take the reciprocal of 8, gives us 0.125 inches. That's the pitch of this particular thread. And we take that 0.125 and divide by 8. It gives us the width of a flat of 0.016 inches. Alright, so one down, one to go. How about this mysterious helix angle? What the heck is a helix angle, and why do we need to know about it? Well, the helix angle is the angle that the thread takes, any thread takes, as it winds around the shaft that it's cut on. Okay, in this case, an easy way to see it is just lay a wire, look at the side of the thread, and lay a wire into the thread. And you'll see that wire kind of takes on a slant to the left. Well, that slant angle is the helix angle of the thread. We need to know about the helix angle because when we cut the thread, the tool has to take on that angle, otherwise it'll rub on one side or the other. We have to allow for that helix angle in the clearance angles on our tool. It's not all that critical on a V-thread. A V-threading cutting tool has enough clearance as it is that you'll very seldom run into a situation where you get rubbing because of a helix angle on a V-thread. If you do, and if you're cutting a very coarse thread, you might run into a situation, but generally that's not an issue. Where we really need to know about that is if we cut an Acme thread or a square thread or a multi-start thread. Then it becomes critical that we apply that helix angle to our cutting tool. But it's a good thing to know, so later on when we do cut a thread, an Acme or a square or something like that, or maybe we're cutting a coarse V thread and we're having problems with the tool rubbing, then we can say, hey, well, maybe it's the helix angle. Maybe I ought to take a look at that. So how do we calculate the helix angle for a 1" 8 thread? Well, there's 3 ways. Okay, the first way, we just look it up in the table. Okay, a good example of that is our trusty machinery's handbook. If we look up helix angle on the index, I think you'll find a chart or a table showing various helix angles for different thread diameters and pitches. Alright, in our case, we're cutting a 1" 8 thread, so we look down here. Here's a 1" diameter thread. Look across to 8. For a 1" 8 thread, our helix angle is 2 degrees 29 minutes. Okay, 2 degrees 29 minutes. That is about 2.5 degrees. Okay, so the table gives us 2.5 degrees. That's one way. That's the easiest way. Okay, what's another way? Well, another way is we can use Trig. We use Trig to calculate this helix angle. Well, I know some of you guys are probably heading for the door, but hang in there for a bit, because when I'm done showing the Trig method, I'll show you a visual method to accomplish the same thing with using hardly any math. So let's look at the Trig method first. What's the formula for helix angle using Trig? Okay, well, the helix angle is equal to the arc tangent of the lead of the thread divided by the circumference of the thread. Alright, lead. There's a new term. what is lead? Well, lead, let's look at our thread again. Lead, if you were to put a nut on a thread like this and rotate the nut 1 revolution, the lead would be the distance that nut moves in 1 revolution. Well, that sounds a lot like pitch. Well, in this case it is pitch. It's exactly the same as pitch. For a single start thread, like we're cutting now, lead and pitch are the same thing. For a multi-start thread, like a 2-start thread, then the lead would be double. 3-start thread, it'd be 3 times the pitch. Okay? But for now, for a single start thread, lead and pitch are the same thing. It makes the lead of this thread equal to the pitch, which is 0.125 inches. Okay, and we divide that by circumference. What's the circumference of this thread, of a 1-inch thread? Okay, well, it's pretty easy. A circumference is just pi times the diameter of the thread. Well, in this case, our thread's 1 inch in diameter, so it's just 1 times pi, or pi. Pi is 3.14. Alright, so we take the arc tangent of this amount. Let's see, let's work it out here. 0.125 inches divided by pi equals 0.039. So we take the arc tangent of 0.039, and that equals 2.278 degrees. 2.3 degrees, roughly. Okay? Well, how come that's not the same as the helix angle we found in the table? Well, probably because when they calculated the helix angle on the table, they used the minor diameter of the thread. We're using the major diameter. So that made the helix angle a little bit steeper. Not a big issue for what we're doing here. It's either one is fine. It's not that critical. Right around 2.5 is what we're looking for. Alright, a third method. This is a pretty cool method. Involves a little bit of drawing. All we do is draw a vertical line and a horizontal line. And on the vertical line, we put a mark. The distance of the circumference of the thread up the line. Well, the circumference of our thread is 3.14 inches. So let's put a little dot, 3.14 inches up the line, about there. And this horizontal line will mark the lead of the thread on the horizontal line. The lead of our thread is 0.125 inches, 1/8 inch. So let's put a mark, an 1/8 inch over there. Now we just connect the dots. That's the lead of our thread. Okay, now we can take our trusty protractor and measure it up and see what we have here. Looks like about 2.5 degrees. Okay. Alright, so there's 3 ways to calculate the helix angle of a thread. Alright, well, let's see here. Now that we know the helix angle of the thread, let's take a look at what we need to do with it and our trusty giant tool here. We have to take that helix angle and we have to add it to the lead cutting edge angle, or the lead clearance angle on the tool, and we have to subtract it from the trailing clearance angle. So if we're cutting steel and our clearance angle is like 5 degrees, we add 2.5 degrees to the 5, and we put 7.5 degrees on the lead side, and minus 2.5 on the trailing side, so it would be 2.5 degrees on the trailing side. And that gives us this characteristic slant to the point on our tool. That's the helix angle of the thread. Alright, well, you guys are probably getting tired of listening to me after all this, so why don't we move on to the grinder and apply some of this stuff we just learned. See you there.